conducting research on elephant seals was so exciting and so much fun. And they told us so much about life and the mysterious sea in which they lived that it was hard to stop. My priority at the time was always publishing the most recent findings in scientific journals, research journals. So I never had time to write a book. That is, until I was forced to retire and the pandemic appeared and kept me housebound, sitting in this chair, facing this computer. What to do? So I wrote a book summarizing years of our research on elephant seals, most of which was done at Año Nuevo State Park, 17 miles up the coast, along with colleagues, collaborators, and many, many students. So in a sense, the pandemic was not all bad. We adapted. So besides emphasizing key aspects of elephant seal natural history in our research, in the book, I tried to speak to a more general audience because all of the detailed stuff is in the journals. I tried to downplay the jargon, the detailed methods, the math, the long-winded tables and figures, etc. It's not a long book. I agree with Eugene Delacroix, the famous romantic Frenchman, who said that lengthiness in a book is a capital defect. So in the next 45 minutes or so, however much time I have, I'll summarize some of the work described in the book that illustrates how special these animals, marine mammals, are, and how natural selection has shaped their behavior, anatomy, and physiology. I want to address three topics, which I've chosen from many that could be addressed. And let me get a slide here now. Yeah. Yeah, here we go. No, it's not giving me the objectives. Just a second. Here we go. Yeah. The objectives are as follows. I want to address the adaptations that seals have had to make for managing life at sea and on land, two completely different environments. Secondly, I want to show that they have pushed the limits for making a living at sea, for diving, for food. Three, I want to address reproduction, particularly in females, because reproduction is the most important thing that animals, plants, viruses, Omicron, whatever, all of them do in life. And in seals, as in most mammals, it all goes through the female. So I'm going to emphasize that. Lastly, I'm going to end up by talking about the importance of long-term studies of wildlife and the why study elephant seals to begin with. Okay, so let me give you a little bit of background from the beginning here. Elephant seals, like all pinnipeds, are land mammals that were modified to obtain food from the sea by natural selection over 1 million years ago. Some animals are still doing that. There are sheep in Brittany and Normandy, France, that feed on the salt flats and will actually swim out to some of these areas in order to forage. The French slaughter these animals and sell the meat, and they advertise it as agneau présalé, pre-salted lamb. And of course, it goes for an additional price. In any case, seals are phocids, the true seals, as distinct from seals and sea lions and the walrus. So there are two species in the genus. There are the northern elephant seal, the hero in this story. It's a male, this is a male, this is a female. And southern elephant seals, a male, and a female to the right. I guess I'm pointing my finger, but you can't see that. Yes, and the southern elephant seals are in the Antarctic, and the northerns are, of course, off the coast of California, Mexico, from about mid-Baja California to a little north of Point Reyes. That's where they breed and live. So like whales, in the 19th century, beginning in about 1800, the seal was shot, its blubber was flinched, and it was rendered to oil, which was used in lighting, lubrication of machinery, paint, tanning, making soap, and so on. Marine mammal oil had value because this was before the development of petroleum. One bull could provide as much as 210 gallons of oil. So the exploitation by sealers was intense, it was ruthless, and it was relentless. By the mid-1800s, it was nearly extinct, and it certainly was considered extinct by 1890. It was a sordid business, this sealing. As one wag put it, one need not sentimentalize over sea elephants. Their only use in the world is to provide blubber. That was the philosophy of the day. But about 20 females and a few males survived on a volcanic island 150 miles off the coast of Baja California, Mexico. It's called Isla de Guadalupe. And from this remnant herd, the population gradually grew and then started to grow very fast and started to recover, settling on islands. Here's the elephant seal again. Islands in San Benito and Cedros, here's Guadalupe, started settling here. And then in the Southern California Bight, San Miguel, Santa Rosa, San Nicolas, San Clemente, and eventually in Central California, Año Nuevo, the Farallones, and Point Reyes. So the population recovered, a remarkable feat, and resettled what was considered to have been its former range. There are approximately 300,000 elephant seals living today, and they breed on these 12 islands and mainland sites in Point Reyes, Año Nuevo, and Piedras Blancas. But in passing through this population bottleneck, the seals lost considerable genetic variation, so much so that one cannot determine paternity using DNA fingerprinting, which works with most animals. How important is this is a question to consider. Okay, well, let me get into the topics. Topic number one is the elephant seals must solve the challenge of living in two very distinct worlds, feeding at sea and breeding on land. And this dual life has required anatomical, physiological, and behavioral adaptations in both environments. And they push the limits of what can be done in both environments. That's the point I want to make. So feeding at sea required a number of adaptations. Anatomical. As you know, probably I'll go through this quickly. The limbs were modified to flippers. The sex organs were retracted into the body. The external ears disappeared, leaving only a small hole to the inner and middle ears. Fur or hair was greatly reduced, especially in length. And then elaborate sensitive vibrissa appear, which made close-in foraging easier. And a thick blubber layer provided insulation for the animal when it was in very cold, deep waters while diving. All of these adaptations improved hydrodynamics and made for more efficient movements in the water for catching prey. In addition, there were some anatomical physiological adaptations, such as what's called countercurrent heat exchange, a blood vessel system. This helped to keep them warm in cold waters. And the system is something like this. You've got crossover in two when things are flowing in two directions. And as there's transfer, as with heat or some chemicals, between one and the other. And as a result, the animal can maintain its core body temperature, for example, when it's in cold water, and do the same when it's very hot and the animal is on land. With physiological adaptations, the biggest hurdle for any animal diving in the sea is got to catch its prey and feed is it cannot breathe underwater. It must hold its breath while searching for finding and consuming its prey. And the elephant seals have several adaptations for doing this. They include reduction in oxygen use by restricting blood flow to certain organs, an increase in myoglobin concentration, that is to say red blood cells in the muscles, toleration of very low arterial oxygen levels, an increase in blood oxygen capacity, high hemoglobin, that is to say carrying the oxygen to where it's needed is very efficient and high, and also red blood cells. The red blood cell to total blood is very high. And most importantly, probably, is large blood volume. It's exceptionally large in elephant seals. Blood carries 66% of the oxygen stores in this species. Muscle carries 30%, and lungs a paltry 5%. So it's not surprising to see an elephant seal will often exhale right before a dive. They don't have to fill the lungs as we do, and most mammals do. Moreover, the seals can reduce oxygen use, which is important during diving, by decreasing the metabolic rate, slowing everything down. This is like us turning down the thermostat to use less natural gas or propane to heat our houses. Well, these adaptations permit the seal to use less energy diving for food than resting at the surface. Less energy diving for food than resting at the surface. This is called the paradox of diving. But there's another important thing they have to deal with, and that is they have to withstand incredible pressure and changes in pressure as they dive to 1,000 meters or more. At 1,000 meters, the pressure is 100 times what it was at surface. The high pressure and rapid changes in pressure as they dive would kill most mammals. It's not quite clear how they manage this, and it's very difficult to study. Putting the seals in what's called a hyperbolic chamber would enable us to do experiments to find out. But these chambers would have to be very large, they would be very expensive, and they would be under immense pressure, and therefore would be as dangerous as working on a bomb. Mm-hmm. We haven't settled this yet. The bends, elephant seals don't get the bends because they are not breathing while they're diving, unlike human divers diving deeply with aqua lungs. There's another important impediment. There is little light at 500 meters, and more than that, there's no light at all. These are depths to which they dive routinely. Now, we know with female diving, because we've studied more females than males because they're smaller, a little bit more manageable. Females at least have learned to feed on several play that produce their own light. They're bioluminescent, and so seals can identify them that way. There's much more to this story, I'm sure. They also have good vision, even in low-level illumination. Behavior, males spend 8 months of the year at sea. Here are males, they're breeding in winter. This December, January, February, March is when the elephant seal season starts. They're at sea during this period, and then they molt for a month later on. Females spend 10 months at sea, breeding for 1 month, at sea, molting for 1 month, the rest of the time they're at sea. 90% of the time the animals spend at sea underwater not breathing, let me say this again, 90% of the time they're at sea, they're not breathing. That is, females spend 60% and males spend 60% and females 75% of the year underwater holding their breath, which is astonishing. Clearly, they push the limits of making a living at sea, but this comes with a cost. And that is what happens when they're on land. In adapting to forage at sea, elephant seals lost attributes that are useful and necessary on land. One of the main ones is predator avoidance. They lost the ability to avoid and evade terrestrial predators such as bears, wolves, coyotes, and of course humans. Flippers as a means of propulsion on land is not very good. It doesn't work well. And moreover, they're burdened by blubber, which accounts for up to 50% of their mass, 46% on average. Historically, we know that elephant seals reduced the threat of predation by breeding and resting on islands, which were bereft of predators. And this worked for a while, but in the last few decades, as islands became more crowded, there are relatively few of them along the coast of California, at least. As the population recovered from near extinctions, the seals sought new uncrowded breeding sites, and they began to breed on mainland points like Point Reyes, Año Nuevo, Piedras Blancas. This worked well for a while too, in part because the bears and wolves had been exterminated, beginning with the Spanish explorers, and now rangers protected the seals from humans in parks. So all seemed well. Seal numbers on mainland rookeries increased significantly from 1975 to the present. In 2020, however, observers at Point Reyes noted that 50% of the weaned pups produced had fresh bites on their hind flippers or huge chunks of their hind flippers chewed off. Amazing. This is a newly weaned pup. It hasn't molted yet. Look at the flippers. They've just been chewed off. Well, they were able to document and film that the predators here were coyotes. There was little the weanling can do because they can't move fast enough to weigh coyotes just chewing on their bodies. They could only cry out and lumber off too slowly. Do these injured weanlings survive? How much does coyote predation affect colony growth? How will the seals adapt? We don't know. We'll see. Now, let me talk about blubber. Blubber, as I said, is useful at sea, and it's essential for living on land. This is because the seals do not feed during the 3-month breeding season or the 1-month molting period. Blubber, let me just show you a shot of blubber. This is a weaned pup with a coronal section right through the middle of the body. In this case, you can see that the blubber takes up about 50% of the pup's weight. So females are fasting for a month while they're lactating. This is most unusual and amazing for a mammal to do this because lactation is very expensive. Males fast for up to 100 days, sometimes more, while competing with each other, lumbering in the rookeries, fighting and trying to mate. Again, both of them can fast because they feed off their blubber. They metabolize fat for water and energy as needed. So a thick layer of blubber is vital and necessary to sustain the seals on land. But it's also a burden. It costs a lot energetically to move these fat bodies on land, especially when it's hot. After all, it's like us wearing a fur coat during midsummer, but the seals can't take off their blubber. So it's a problem. How do they cope? Well, they try to reduce activity, which is not too easy because a rookery is a very active place. And best thing to do is when everybody else is inactive, you become inactive yourself until that peters out. Well, one thing they do is when it's hot, they will sand flip. They will put sand on their backs to prevent direct heat to their bodies. And in doing so, they're digging into the substrate, and which is a cooler place, particularly if there are pebbles down below. So that's one thing they do. Another thing they do is, well, it's important though, because blubber is the refrigerator that takes them through their periods on land, is they've got to conserve both water and energy. And they employ several ways of doing this. One is to sleep when possible, sleep as long as possible. Here again, that's relatively minor, I think. The other is that they lose a lot of water when they breathe, when they exhale. So they have very large turbinates in the nose, which act like blotters, which simply extracts most of the moisture in any exhalation. So there's a savings there. But perhaps the most interesting one, and maybe the most important one, is irregular breathing during sleep. Elephant seals are fascinating in the sense that they hold their breath while sleeping on land. For example, an adult male or female will sleep for 20 to 30 minutes, perhaps with its head in a tide pool. And after 20 or 30 minutes, lift its head, breathe for 2 or 3 minutes, and then put its head back in the water and sleep for another 20, 30 minutes. And it will repeat this over and over again unless disturbed. Because of the resemblance of this sleep pattern to the diving pattern, holding breath for a long period of time, we call these terrestrial dives. Okay, so fewer exhalations would be the case if the animal breathed regularly. The animal would be losing more water to the environment, and that would have to come from blubber. Okay, and there's about a 23% savings by doing this, depending on ambient temperature, interruption of sleep, age, sex, and things like that. How did this evolve? This is the scenario. Elephant seals took apneas, originally selected for pups to survive the birth process, going through the birth canal. They retained it, and they expanded this behavior in adulthood as a fundamental adaptation for procuring prey while diving, holding its breath, as well as for conserving water and energy during long fasts on land. Isn't natural selection amazing? To put this in perspective, consider that sleep apnea is a serious problem in humans. A person's airway closes during sleep, breathing stops, and starved for air, the person awakens. This can lead to a heart attack, a stroke, and it may accelerate cognitive decline in older people. Sleep apnea in humans affects 2 to 3% of the human population. That's about 5 million men and 2.5 million women. This means it's as common as mental illness. So sleep apnea is a serious problem in humans. It's simply a way of life in elephant seals. The related question is, when do elephant seals sleep while they're at sea? Interesting question, no time for it. Maybe we can come back to it. In summary, living in two entirely different worlds means that elephant seals must manage a balancing act. To do this, they must push the limits in one place, do extreme superlative things, and they do this in both environments. This juggling act is dynamic, and it adjusts as the environment changes. We'll see what happens as the planet warms, because these animals living in the sea are certainly affected by warm water, as we'll see. Okay, topic number 2 now. Elephant seals are extraordinary divers, and it's interesting to take a look at the mechanisms which permit them to do this. Let me start from a place that really affected a lot of changes. We've learned, when I first started doing this, we didn't know a thing about diving and elephant seals. The sea was a dark hole. All we knew is the animals entered into it, They fed because they came back, they went into the sea skinny and they came back fat. We knew they were feeding, but that was about it. We learned much about the diving behavior of elephant seals because of the development of what we call dive recorders, or time depth recorders. And these were recorders that were attached to the animals, measured some aspect of their diving behavior, which then told us what they might be doing. This development began in the mid-60s and has really revolutionized the study of elephant seals and most mammals in their marine environment. The instruments were really rudimentary at the start. As they became more sophisticated, as they went from mechanical to miniaturized computers with a multitude of sensors, a wealth of information increased dramatically. And the at-sea behavior of elephant seals, especially, were revealed in detail. Let me just say, for the historical interest here, is that the first study required that you put these rudimentary recorders on. Basically, they were a clock and a Bourdon tube which measured pressure. And they had to be collected after the animal spent a short period at sea. So the first studies were done on Weddell seals, which maintain a breathing hole on the fast ice. And when they want to feed, they had to go into the hole, feed in the water, and then come back to the same hole. If you put the instrument on the animal, 20 minutes later, it's got to come back, you recover the instrument. Similarly, for fur seals and sea lions, females give birth, they feed their young pup for a day or two, then they go to sea and feed, then they come back and feed the pup again. And they keep repeating this. So you instrument the female, she goes to sea for 2 days, you recover the instrument, you get the data. Now, elephant seals are different though. It was the first marine mammal to carry TDRs, these instruments, for months at sea. And owing to us deploying hundreds of instruments on elephant seals from 1983 to the present, we learned a great deal about their diving behavior. And so that's what I'm going to address now. Okay. In general, an elephant seal dives on average for 20 minutes, followed by 2 to 3 minutes at the surface. And they repeat this pattern continuously for months that they are at sea. On average, this is 60 dives per 24-hour day. Their dives are of long duration. They can be up to 1.5 hours or more. Oh. Up to 2 hours in the southern elephant seal. And they still spend only 2 to 3 minutes at the surface following these very deep and very long dives. Amazing. How deep? Well, here again, they certainly dived, I say 1.6 kilometers, they actually dive deeper than that. How deep is it 1.6 kilometers? This is a mile. As I used to tell my students, this is like 4.2 Empire State Buildings, one stacked on top of the other. Or consider this, the tallest tree in the world is a coast redwood named Hyperion. It is 116 meters high. Elephant seals dive to depths equal to 14 of these trees stacked one on top of the other. Okay. There are also sex differences in the foraging pattern of elephant seals at sea. Females typically feed in the open ocean. Let me show you the tracks here. No, I don't want to do that. Let me go back. Yeah, okay. Females feed in the open ocean. They are yellow. And of course, we've done many more deployments, so there's a lot more yellow to be shown than in this figure. Males are in red. They're feeding along the coastline, the continental slope, all the way out to the Aleutians. So there's sexual segregation here in foraging. But females are feeding in the top 200 to 800 meters typically. And they're feeding on myctophids, ragfish, viperfish, barracuda, and squid, patches of prey that are grouped together, which they find. And this is in what's called the deep scattering layer, which are these animals that move up and down with available light. Higher at night, lower during the day. It's a migratory pattern. Males, on the contrary, are diving benthically, that is to say, near the ocean bottom, at least on the continental slope. And males are fasting. They're not feeding while they're migrating to what we call these focal foraging areas, with the dots. And when they get to this place where they feed, they binge feed around the clock on skates, rays, ratfish, small sharks, hagfish, more energy dense prey, because they're bigger, they need more energy to get there and to maintain it. We got a lot more data on females than on males, that's another story. In summary, there's habitat separation and foraging and migration. And the diving pattern between the sexes differs as well. This is especially the case if you look at the dive shapes, the two-dimensional dive shapes, which I'll do right now. Okay, this is simply a diving record of one female to give you an idea of what it looks like. When we were in the old building, it was not letters in science, it's applied science building, we used to spread these on the floor and it went the length of the floor and we're trying to interpret what the seal is doing. So these are grouped together now. This is where the animal leaves Año Nuevo, it gets to the continental slope, deep water, and it starts to dive deep, and it does that, it does that. This is breaking the record because we don't have enough room to show it. And then the animal comes back to Año Nuevo here. Now, if you expand this record, you get a sense of the dive shapes of individual dives. And we can discern 4 different types of dives. Number 1 is these AB dives, which are primarily for transit, from going from A to B during migration. We want to get to a place in a hurry like the males do. They use these transit dives. And females use them not only in transit, but to explore, maybe to go deeper and see if there's bigger food or more food down there. And so they will feed as well in these dives, as well as in transit. Okay, now let me then go down to the D dives. These are the dives that are most often exhibited. 75% of their dives are of this type in females. The animal dives down to a certain depth, say 200, 300, 400 meters. And then there are these wiggles at the bottom, up and down movements. And then the animal comes to the surface. We suspected early on that this represented foraging at the bottom of these dives. It was speculation based on the shape of the dive in 2 dimensions plus swim speed. Indeed, this was confirmed later on by my friend Yasuhiko Naito, who designed this jaw motion sensor, which were glued to the lower jaw of females. And then he was able to track when the animal closed its mouth, that is to say, indicative of feeding. Here is a track record right here. Red shows when the mouth was closed, open and closed. And the pattern of the diving is shown as well. So you can see what that looks like. Now, this is just an excerpt at the bottom of this larger record. The first 5 dives are what are called D dives, the so-called pelagic foraging dives. And you can see that the foraging is at the bottom of the dive where we expected it to be. Same thing is true on the other side of the slide, but you have 2 exploratory dives there, the very deep ones. Okay, the other dive shape I wanted to talk about are these dives in the middle, which are C dives. Let me move back to what that looks like. Yeah, C dives right here. In this case, the seal dives down to a certain depth, 200 meters, 400 meters, whatever, and whoops, back. And then drifts down the rest of the way to the bottom. It takes up about a third of the dive and then motors up to the top. So there's a drift phase there. These dives are associated with a long bout of feeding. They must have something to do with feeding. Indeed, our speculation is that they serve an internal processing function, such as digestion of food, getting rid of metabolites, resting or sleeping. And what's interesting here is that when the animal leaves the rookery, it is negatively buoyant. It's lost a lot of its mass, and that's come from blubber. So it sinks when it drifts. But then as it feeds, it gets to a point where it's neutrally buoyant. And as it continues to feed, it gets to a point where it's positively buoyant and it starts to drift up. This is important because what it tells you is that the animal is successful in foraging. And since we know from these recorders where the animal is located, it tells you where it's feeding at the time. In addition, another thing that changes as they feed is the descent and ascent rates changes, particularly the descent rate. So from this, we're getting a real incredible picture of not only what the seals are doing and how successful they are at it, but what's in the environment that's of interest to oceanographers and the like. Okay, let me now address another topic. How does northern elephant seal diving compare with whale diving? Comparisons, first of all, are difficult because northern elephant seals data are collected from archival TDRs, which means that we have to recover these instruments to get the data. But we get lots of data and it's very precise. This is easily done with elephant seals. They're predictable. They come back to the same place with great reliability, particularly the females. We get something like 75 to 90% of them back once we instrument one, and it's at sea for the duration of pregnancy, 2 or 3 months. Most recorders on whales and dolphins, however, remain on the animals for only a few hours or more, but they must be recovered at sea or uplinked to a satellite. And the problem is instrument attachment on whales is much more difficult. These satellite data are not as precise as archival recorded data. So what can we do? Well, we can certainly do this. We can compare the deepest and longest dives, and that's what I'm going to do right now. Here we go. Oh, wow, where am I? No, come on. Here we go. It's a little tricky instrument here. The deepest divers are the donocetes, the toothed whales. Baleen whales are shallow divers, so we won't even consider them. The champion is Cuvier's beaked whale, which dives to 2,992 meters. That's the maximum dive. Baird's a little bit less, and narwhal, just for comparison here, 1,500 meters. Okay, what about the seals? Northern elephant seals is 1,872 meters. This is deeper than all the rest of them except for Cuvier's beaked whale. Southern elephant seal, even greater, over 2,000 meters. Okay. Now, did I say this before? How deep is this? No. Yeah, I did. Okay, with duration, again, the champion is Cuvier's beaked whale, 137.5 minutes. Baird's whale, 64 minutes. Northern elephant seals, 116 minutes. Southern elephant seals, 120 minutes. So the elephant seal is in august company with respect to deep and long diving. It is right there. The only one deeper is, of all the whales, is Cuvier's beaked whale. Okay, let me move on because time is going. Talk about reproduction. Reproduction is the most important thing that in life for animals in general, certainly for males. Some might say for males in general, but anyway, that's another story. I want to talk about females. It's important for the individuals, for the success of the colony, for the population, for the species, for the future. And all reproduction goes through the females. For example, a male may inseminate 100 females, but if the females don't give birth and wean their pup, the male gets 0 in terms of reproduction. So it's vital that we understand the process, who wins and who loses in this reproductive competition among females. The gold standard in studying reproduction in females in a wild population is to determine lifetime reproductive success, ideally in a large sample. This takes a great deal of time and effort. For elephant seals, one must track pups born and weaned by recognizable individuals every breeding season during a full lifetime, which can mean 4 weeks tracking known mothers during the breeding season and possibly doing that for 20 years in a female that lives to age 23. This means a lot of time in the field, in the blind, observing individually marked females, when they arrive, when they give birth, does the pup live, is it weaned, what is its sex, its weight, and whether it lives long enough to breed, year after year. We, and I mean a cast of thousands of observers, tracked over 8,000 females this way that were born from 1963 to 2008, whose behavior was recorded every breeding season of their lives from 1968 to 2018. Joanne's got that. Okay. Joanne, get the phone. Okay, to cut to the quick, let me give you the results here. 75% of the weaned pups died before reproducing at age 3 or 4. They died before getting to reproductive age. That is to say, only 1 out of 4 made it. Those females and males did not survive, died at sea. So the sea gives sustenance to many, but is a grim reaper for most of them. The second point from this long-term study is that the majority of young surviving females, 3 to 5 years old, died after producing only 1 or a few pups. Moreover, these young females were poor mothers, because young females are typically poor mothers, and they had a low weaning rate. So while young mothers are the most numerous breeding females on the rookery, because they haven't died yet, they produce far less healthy progeny than one expects. And then the last point, and the most interesting one, and the one I really couldn't predict before we looked at the data, is that long-lived females had exceptional lifetime reproductive success. These so-called supermoms, which were defined as females that produced 10 to 20 pups in life, were less than 10% of the sample. Nevertheless, they were responsible for 55% of total pup production, despite being outnumbered 3 to 1 by females that produce less than 9 pups. For example, consider this statistic, higher math here. 326 females, that is to say 4% of the sample, produced only 1 pup in life, 326 pups. Pup production was the same for 17 females, 0.2% of the sample, that produced 19 pups in life. In other words, 17 long-lived multiparous females produced the same number as 326 females, a 19-fold difference in number. Supermoms are something else. Okay. how did they do it, I guess is the question. Well, here's some successful reproductive strategies. I could go into a great detail, but time does not permit. Typically, most females breed early and at every opportunity, and they live as long as possible. They tend to delay the age at primiparity, those that do delay the age at primiparity, and live longer. They live longer if they delay the age at primiparity. Sorry, the exception being the supermoms. They start early, they do well, and they do well throughout life. Pup weaning weight tends to increase with mother's age up to about age 7. That is to say, mean lifespan, probability of breeding, and observed breeding appearances, all of those increase with mass at weaning. Mass at weaning is good, all of that comes from the mother. The supermoms, evidently, because they live long, avoid the pitfalls at sea and accrue more resources to nourish their pups because their pups are bigger. So these are important reproductive strategies. Before closing this up, let me just, a minor digression here. Female elephant seals are what are called capital breeders, meaning that they provision their pups daily. No, they provision their pups from energy stores accumulated earlier during the 8-month gestation period. This is distinct from income breeders like seal lions and fur seals that provision offspring using energy concurrently while nursing. Nurse for a few days, then go to sea to feed for a few days, and so on. In elephant seals, all milk nourishment comes from the female's body stores. Consequently, the pup's birth and weaning weight reflects directly the nourishment received from the mother owing to her foraging success during pregnancy. This is a closed system because the female elephant seal fasts while nursing and the pup gets nourishment from the mother's milk alone. In other words, the mother's foraging success at sea is tightly linked with her reproductive success on land. It follows that maternal age, size, and body composition are important features of reproduction in elephant seals. Well, you get the point here. Let me just say this, that supermoms determine the majority of participants in subsequent generations. They have a great influence on the future. I also say this, that it's remarkable that females are pregnant or nursing from the time they give birth for the first time at age 3 until they die. That is, a female is in the reproductive mode all of her adult life. When do they have fun? I don't know. Clearly, some females are extremely exceptional there. Well, why are they so successful? To really answer this question, you have to look at what they're doing at sea. They die less frequently than the other females. Why is that? Well, we know what kills some sea lions. Let me get, no, okay. Yeah, we know that sharks and killer whales will kill some seals. Here's a bite out of a female. There's a male that's been killed by a shark. This one got his rear end taken off, and this is a ship strike. We know that there's debris in the ocean and things like that, but we don't know how serious each one of these factors is in terms of the mortality at sea. We also know that seals have a difficult time foraging at sea when the weather's warm, such as during El Niños. By that, I mean that we weigh them before they leave, and when they come back, we know that some females do not gain mass at all during these very hot years. We know that they have to work harder at it, and there are several ways we can determine that. What this slide shows you is that these are El Niños in red, these are La Niños in cold. This is when it's warm, this is when it's colder. And these 3 to 4 year cycles of El Niños are superimposed on a decadal cycle called sardine and anchovy regime. cold during the anchovy regime, warm during the sardine regime. And here is pup weaning weight. Here again, closed system. It depends on how well the females are foraging, determines the weaning weight. So here's the weaning weight. It goes down and when you enter this warm period until it reaches a bottom towards the end of that period. And as the anchovy regime starts, it starts to increase again. I wish we had continued this even further, but time did not permit. So that's evidence that this might be important as well. Might there be a genetic component to these supermoms? Well, we know that 2 females out of many produced daughters that themselves became super daughters or supermoms. However, much more data is needed to make a case that this might have a genetic influence. Okay, last point I want to make, because it's getting close to closing time here. I want to emphasize the importance of long-term studies in nature, particularly of wild animals. It's vital for determining the adaptive value of behavioral traits and how they change over time. The best studies in nature, the gold standard, are long-term studies that cover the entire lives of individuals, their lifetime reproductive success, multiple generations, as we've done with at least 2 generations. And one learns natural history, how individuals find food and survive, how they reproduce, determine the next generation, how the population recovers from near extinction, how a colony and a population ebbs and flows through time, how new colonies are formed, and how different species are created. So long-term studies are important, but they're rare. There aren't many of them. Here are some of the best, the longest ones, the ones that are most representative in the literature. We're right up there, 6 decades, right there, started about the same time as Jane Goodall studied her studies of chimpanzees. And then there are other studies as well, very well-known studies, the red deer by Clinton-Brock et al. In England, African elephants, cheetahs, and a great study of prairie dogs as well. I would say that one last point is that all of these studies, particularly these rare studies here, are only as good as the wildness of the animals they're studied. And this varies a great deal. For example, Goodall, after watching the animals for 3 or 4 years before she could approach them, actually fed the animals so that she had a place to observe them. Okay, but you're affecting their behavior. Whereas some of these other studies, the animals were culled, or they were poached, or there were more tourists studying the animals, like with cheetahs, than there were cheetahs. All of this had an effect on the animals under study. My point is that the elephant seal study done here was very special for its length and for the fact that they are very robust against disturbance, and we have evidence showing that they were not disturbed by this at all. Last point, and this in a sense is the beginning point and it's a summary point. Why study elephant seals in the first place? What does that get you? Why don't you spend your time studying RNA or what is it, like Harry Nollard does, or Barry studying the basic structure of eukaryotic cells, or Beth Shapiro, whatever, other biologists. Well, let me go through this. First of all, why are they special? There are 3 general mating systems in animals and birds: polygyny, monogamy, and polyandry. Parental investment in the young differentiates one system from the other. The most common system is polygyny, where a few males do most of the mating and not a damn thing for the young, nothing at all. The female does everything. This is the most common system. Monogamy is where both parents help to feed and raise the young because it's necessary. And this occurs in most birds and a few mammals. Polyandry is rare and occurs in some birds, for example, where life is so tough and unpredictable that a female lays a clutch of eggs, and the chances are that before the eggs hatch, they'll be destroyed. So what a female does is she enlists the help of several male mates. She mates with several different males, each of whom takes care of a clutch of eggs and rears the young to maturity. Female does none of that. She lays the eggs and then she gets out. Okay, so the point I'm making here is elephant seals are the most polygynous mammal in the most common mating system observed in animals and birds. So that alone is a good reason to study them. Few males monopolize mating. They're the best fighters. That's another story. 2, they're extremely sexually dimorphic. That typically goes with extreme polygyny. Males are 3 to 10 times larger than females. How large is that? This is analogous to a 100-pound human female having a liaison with a 1,000-pound human male. Imagine that. So elephant seals are also the largest pinniped. Size matters. They are top trophic level predators that impacts much of the marine life below them. 4, there are extreme sex differences in lifespan in elephant seals. Females live 64% longer than males. The maximum age of females is 23, perhaps longer. The maximum lifespan for males is 14. To put this in perspective, for 229 species, the homogametic sex, usually the female, lives 17.6% longer than the heterogametic sex, usually males. In humans, the female advantage is 7.8%. I repeat, in elephant seals, the female advantage is 64%. Okay, reproduction. Most important thing to understand in animals. Study females because they're doing it all. And this can be done readily in elephant seals, as I think I have shown in the long-term study, which I described to you. You can't do this in most animals. 6, they manage life in 2 different environments, and this requires a delicate balancing act, as I've said. 7, they are superlative diving machines. What more can I say? 8, they were nearly made extinct, and they were made a remarkable recovery. They're genetically depauperate. We'd like to know how significant this is, not only in elephant seals, but in the other few animals like bison, who also have suffered population bottlenecks. Lastly, there are practical reasons to study elephant seals, particularly for me. Foremost is that they are, I'm quoting here, easy subjects. They're not afraid of humans, and they do not flee from you as sea lions and fur seals do. They can be marked and tagged, and thus individuals can be tracked from day to day and year to year throughout life. Most important, it's a fundamental thing to do. They can be weighed, they can be measured, blood sample, tissue sample, milk sample, whisker sample, and much more. They are robust against disturbance. Compare them, for example, to studying whales, or howler monkeys, or white sharks, and many other animals. Second big point is this. They breed at the same time annually, 17 miles up the coast here, 25 minutes from my former office and laboratory on the UCSC campus. This was convenient. I didn't have to mount an expensive expedition to Africa, Patagonia, or the Antarctic to conduct my research. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bernie. I'm gonna go back so we can see all the people here. Okay, so questions for Bernie. Okay, and you can unmute yourself if you have a question. So go ahead. Must be some questions out there.
Barry?
Go ahead.
You have to do the video.
Oh, you're talking to me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Bernie, would you care to speculate on the future of elephant seals in relation to climate change?
I think that's very important because in the little time I've had available, I've shown you that they are affected by the warm waters. And this is one thing that climate change will certainly bring about. The waters will get warmer, are getting warmer. It affects the distribution of their prey. It affects when and where they feed and how much effort they must expend. And at its worst, it's going to mean that females may not be able to forage sufficiently to actually complete the pregnancy and give birth to a viable pup. It's something we'll have to monitor, but important.
Okay, Constantine, unmute yourself.
Yeah. Like always, we try to imitate nature to our advantage. And as an ex-sports diver, I was wondering, has there been any research into how this animal can retain its oxygen, as you said, in its blood, how we can adapt that to us or to any equipment that we might design? Has there been any work in that area?
Well, that's a very important question. And I think this is for the physiologist to reply to. As of yet, I don't think that inroads have been made there. But clearly, if we could just depress metabolism during surgery, for example, as elephant seals do during diving, it would be a boon to things that we'd have to do. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Oxygen utilization, oxygen management, they do that supremely well. We must learn from it.
Okay. Thank you.
Roger, you had a question?
Yeah, I was curious about the coyotes' predation. Do the mothers and the fathers too in the elephant seals have an instinct to protect their young? And it seems to me that, well, just from watching elephant seals, that they might be able to do that.
No, as it turns out, they do not, because the situation is this, is a female weans her pup. She says, I've done everything I can. I've fed it from my own body, and it's tripled its body weight on milk that is 55% fat. I'm done. I'm going off and get ready for the next pup that I'm going to give birth to. That's her strategy. So what the weanlings do is they move off into the dunes and they sleep during the day and then start going into the water and learning to swim and dive. Some of them will sneak back into the rookery and try to steal milk from mothers that are not their own. And some of them are very successful at this. They get adopted by a female who's lost her pup. The sneakers are primarily males because it's to a great advantage of a male to get bigger as early as possible, whereas it's not a similar advantage to the female. Now, so the mother does nothing for the pup after it's weaned. The pup squeals and yells for more milk and it voices in the night, but they don't get help from their parents, no. And of course, the males wouldn't, it's not in their vocabulary at all.
Okay, Tom Dietz.
Yeah, hi, Bernie.
Hi, Tom. Hello.
Hi, how are you? Doesn't this biological strategy of extreme polygyny and supermoms severely restrict genetic diversity and hence speciation?
It may very well do that. That's something for the geneticists to demonstrate, but it would be comparing one system to another, I suppose. You touch on an important question, though. For example, let me go off on a slight digression here, is that females will mate in the harem. Most of the mating in the harem is done by the dominant males. Most of them is done by the alpha male. And they may happen several times. Female mate with the same male, or she may mate with a different male. When she leaves, there are males that are just hungry to mate, but they haven't been able to mate because of the power structure. And they forcibly attempt to mate with the female as she departs the rookery to go back out to sea and feed. Okay? My question, I was going to earn my Nobel Prize here, was are these almost rapes because they're violent? Some females are killed in that situation. Are they effective? Do these males inseminate the females, and does the female produce progeny? Otherwise, why is this behavior there? The problem is because they lost genetic variability, even though we could collect tissue samples from all the participants, we could not differentiate one potential father from another. We couldn't do DNA fingerprinting. So we never could answer this question. But it's an interesting question. I mean, if it worked, then that's one way to add variability to it. One more point related to that is, when do virgin females mate and with whom, and how important it is? We don't see it on the rookery. Maybe a handful in 20 years, early in the season, nothing. So the question becomes, are they mating with the dominant, well, they're not mating with the dominant males because they're in the rookery. Are they mating at that time of year with subadult males who are out in the water who couldn't mate because of the power structure on land? Are they mating during the off year? For example, females mate, they delay implantation for 3 or 4 months until the fertilized egg implants the uterine wall, and then gestation begins, and it lasts 8 months. Maybe the first time they mate, it doesn't delay at all, but that means that she would be mating around the time molting. Point is this: we don't know who they're mating with. Odds are, if they're mating with any males, it's probably not going to be the dominant males. So this could be a way to add variation, genetic variation in the gene pool for the next generation. However, as I've said before, females who give birth for the first time are more apt to lose their pups. So maybe virgin matings don't count very much at all anyway, genetically. It may count as practice for being a good mother later on, or a good mater later on. But it's an interesting question. Yes, but tough to track.
Barbara, did you have your hand up for a question?
Yeah, I did, Barry. Thank you. This was a wonderful talk. It was so interesting. Thank you so very much. I have a couple of questions. I'll try to state them as clearly and quickly as I can. First of all, I'm really curious about how you know when animals lose their blubber, or when they gain weight. Are they weighed? How do you do that? That's so intriguing to me. Another question is,
well, let him answer that one first.
Okay.
Well, we weigh the animals. We can weigh the females directly. We put them on a tripod, roll them up and just hoist them up, and we weigh them.
Okay.
And they go out and when they come back. With males, that's not feasible. And we have a model where we get measures of the fat layer around the body. We measure the length, and then we can predict from that very closely what the final weight of the animal is. It's very interesting. Another way we do this is to weigh them directly. We had a flat scale of load cells, and it's 16 feet long. Chip Deutsch and Mike Haley did this work. They were graduate students at the time. So basically, I have a picture of this in the book, by the way. What they would do is they would lay the scale down in an arroyo high on each side. They would play the sounds. We had a model of a female made out of styrofoam or something like that. We wiggle the model and we'd play the sound of a female being accosted by a male, which is very distinctive. All the males head up, they're looking around, and they see the model, they follow the model. We take the model over the scale, the male follows over the scale. And then we had a kind of a ridiculous situation where all of a sudden something flops up in front of the scale. So the male has to stop on the scale. 10 or 12 feet away, we've got an electronic device where we press a button, we get a reading. The problem is that you have to do this twice. You do this before the male leaves. You can scale it up. So you know when the male arrived, you know when you got the weight. We can say, well, he lost so much weight per day. So we can say, well, he weighed this much when he arrived. And we do the same thing when he comes back. They did a wonderful job. It took a lot of patience, a lot of heavy lifting. So yes, we can measure both males and females and see how well they do. And again, while they're at sea feeding, because of the difference in specific gravity, we can determine how well they're doing.
Mhm.
Second question. Yeah.
Okay, my second question is, why do some females delay their premiparity?
Well, I don't think, I'm not sure that any of them do that. I simply said as a theoretical possibility, it might be that virgin females do that the first time they give birth, but I don't know that that's the case. I'm simply trying to explain, when do they mate, with whom do they mate, and does it make a difference? Is it important? In the large scheme of things, I don't think it's very important, because they lose many pups when they give birth anyway.
And what are the reasons for that? What are the factors that go into that?
Death at sea. They're naive. When they leave, they're naive. They've learned how to swim to a depth of 5-10 meters at most. They can hold their breath for 10 minutes. And they leave. And as soon as they hit deep water, they're diving to 250, 300 meters. Moreover, they don't know what to eat. No one's showing them what to eat. What's good, what's bad, which way to go. So a lot of them die. The death rate is highest during that first trip to sea. And, up there, 60, 70, 80%, depending on the weather too. If it's an El Nino year, it's even worse.
Yeah, so that relates in a way to one of my other questions, which is, do we know what their diet actually is? Has anybody looked at stomach contents or how do you know, and what is it?
Well, yes, particularly in adult females, because they have been studied more intensively. There are practical reasons for this. If you put an instrument that's worth $4,000 or $5,000 on a seal, you damn sure like to get it back, because your funds are limited. Females, if you pick one, especially in her prime, she's best is 90% of them return. You're doing very well. And typically you're doing that well, 75 to 90%. With pups going to sea for the first time, you're going to lose a lot of instruments. And it's very expensive. And some studies have been done, but we don't know much about what they eat. With females, though, here again, Yasuhiko Naito has actually filmed females eating. We know they're eating lots of animals that are very small. And whereas it was first considered that squid were most important, now the thinking is based on camera visualizations of what they're feeding on. Myctophids are probably the most important thing. Males, we know far less about, because we just haven't put as many instruments on them, because it's harder to do. And here again, you tied to reproduction, because that's most important. So females are most important. I hope in the future we do more studies of males, so because they're feeding in a completely different way, in a different place. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so very much.
Let's see. So Corinne, you have a question?
Are there multiple births, twins, triplets?
Not in northern elephant seals. I think twins were observed 1 or 2 cases in southern elephant seals over something like 50 years. It would be selected against very strongly, because female really can only do a good job feeding 1 pup. So feeding 2 would put her at a disadvantage. It would be selected against very quickly. Now, let me say this, though. There are some females on the rookery, and you may see this if you go to Año Nuevo, who have lost their pups. And some of them will adopt another pup that is not her own, that's okay. But some will adopt 4 or 5 pups. They can't possibly feed that many. Why does this happen? I'm not quite sure, but it does occur.
Okay, maybe a couple more questions. Let's see, you can unmute yourself if you have another question here.
I know
Lincoln?
him. I know
Lincoln.
him.
And who?
Lincoln.
Okay. It sounds like there's still a lot of questions about genetic diversity in the current population. And of course, the population went through a bottleneck when there was that big, kill off.
Yeah.
So are there any collections over time of element seal tissue that would allow someone like Beth Shapiro to do genomic analysis to give you some handle on the genetic diversity over time?
That's a good question. My colleague Russ Holzell, who is in England, has done several studies on this. The samples systems are meager. It would be wonderful if Beth took a look at this as well. We'd like to know for sure. You would expect that the diversity would be considerably less in modern day animals than they were in the early 1800s.
Okay, and somebody else had tried to ask a question there before. Lincoln? Any other questions there?
What about her?
Oh, okay, up in the corner. Marianne.
Hi, I just found the little hand raise button.
Yeah.
I had a question I've been curious about for years and years. We were anchored off Guadalupe Island back in '86, and it was hard to sleep that night because those things were swimming under the boat and triggering the depth sounder, and we kept thinking we were drifting into the cliff there. It's a very steep island. But we got out the binoculars, and then I ended up rowing the dinghy up close to shore and observing these animals, and their behavior was just not only rude, it was brutal. I mean, I thought the males were playing Frisbee, but they were ripping off chunks from their chest and flinging chunks of red flesh up into the air. I mean, it was very dramatic. But the worst thing was there was this big bull, and he looked like he was squishing one of the babies. And he was just right over that poor little baby, and it looked like maybe he killed it. And I wondered if you had observed any behavior like that and what the mortality might be from the bulls killing little ones.
Well, I'm assuming that the animals swimming under the boat and that you were observing were elephant seals.
Oh yeah.
Okay, well, yes, when males fight, they will certainly injure their opponents. And even the winner will be bloody on the chest at the end of the fight on the beach. Again, I have pictures of that in the book as well. As for males will run over pups in their path. And particularly if the pup is less than a week old, that's one of the principal causes of pup mortality on the rookery. The other is females biting pups that are not their own. They're protecting their milk for their own pup, and they will bite other pups. So it's a rough place for a young pup, no question about that. But males, it's like a piece of furniture to them. They're intent on mating, and they just rampage right through the rookery.
Well, thank you very much, Bernie. As you can see, lots of interest, lots of questions.
It's been a pleasure.
Oh,
Thank you. I would, if you haven't already, you should go see during the breeding season, which is just past its peak right now at Año Nuevo. It's a great tour, and you don't have to go to Africa to see wild animals. You got them right here. Thank you.
Right. Yeah, and if you're interested in do that, you have to go to the website, State Parks website, make a reservation.
Right.
All right, but if you haven't done it, if you're a Santa Cruz person, you got to get out there at least once in your life.
I agree, I agree.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody. Next month, Sandy Faber. All right. Hope to see you there. Maybe in person. Who knows? Okay.